up here. There will be refreshments afterwards, but there are many things on the table up here that you might like to see. There are pictures of him. There is his diploma, which someone present here has very kindly brought for us to see. We have his certificate of the Dialectical Society. I have no idea what that was, but it's the Honor Society. You will see one of the things we're going to show you is his class standing, and it was sufficient to make him a member of the Dialectical Society. There's epaulets and other kinds of things that I hope you will take advantage of to look at afterwards, all memorabilia to deal with Putnam. All right, so let's go.
Jim?
Yes, good. I love it. I love it. Please interrupt me because
We also have a member of that family here, Annie Putnam.
I hope that
Her parents lived in the brick house, the Putnam house.
right down the street here. And I hope that, well, I just hope that what we do does him honor. We want to do so if we can. Right, Lou?
Absolutely.
Here's a picture of the man whom we're talking about tonight, Colonel S. Putnam. Tells you who he was. And he started out as a captain and a traffic engineer. Then, 7 minutes worth of volunteers. Lou, I have a question. Why is it called the ex-New volunteers when people were conscripted? It was a draft. They didn't volunteer. I mean, people were able to pay their way out. Why are they called volunteers?
The draft actually didn't start until the end of 61, beginning of 62. The very first units were, in fact, all volunteers. They went to conscripts and they went to bounties, paying bounties for them. Later on in the war.
Can you speak out? Pardon? I can't hear you. Oh, I'm sorry.
Later on in the war, they went to paying bounties to the men who they enlisted, because it became quite apparent that where most of these fellows were going was a very dangerous place, especially when neighbors were coming back with no arms and no legs, horribly in poor health because of the food that they were being fed and the marching that they were doing. So it wasn't until later that, in fact, they were not all volunteers. But many of them, and most of them, were. One of the units that I'm very familiar with is the 11th New York. It's called the 1st Fire Squad. And that unit was all volunteers, and they were formed in a period of less than 2 days. So, one of the most remarkable units in the Civil War.
Please interrupt. I'd love to.
I'm sorry. Everyone knows Jim, but some of you may not know me. My name is Gage, and I've been a student of the Civil War for some time. Really enjoyed the study at home.
Here's a picture of his father. We will try and show you some letters that are written to him. I guess I ought to stop right there and say this is the first time that I've ever had really the opportunity to deal with what historians call primary sources. And that's so exciting to read these letters. You're going to have some sense of what I want to try and show is what's going on back here in Cornish while their son is up at West Point. And you'll see the kinds of preoccupations, some of them amusing, some of them really fascinating, but most of them are terribly human. The same kinds of things you can find in 2010, even though the kinds of letters were written in 1857, 1863. Historical background. I can't do this without some sort of background. I'm assuming that all of you remember these things from your high school history class. But just in case you don't, there is this very important thing called the Missouri Compromise. We're going to go back now to 1820. Most of the kinds of things we're talking about happened in the 50s and early 60s. But just as phrases like no more taxes read my lips, or in the first president's sense of 20 years is not that long ago. And this is the kind of thing that was very important then. The Missouri Compromise established a latitude that between Missouri and Nebraska that stretches out, you can visualize a map of the United States to the Pacific and to the Atlantic, and it said that that was the northernmost limit for slavery in the new territories. Then there was the presidency of Andrew Jackson, which fits into the kinds of background in the 1850 because he was trying to extend and able to extend the power of the executive branch at the expense of the states. And you will see that this issue becomes more important as we get into what state is going to be a slave state and the northern abolitionists. The Kansas-Nebraska Act of 1854. Now this is the year after Putnam goes to West Point. And this is terribly important for what it did. It allowed any new territory to vote for or against slavery. As they came in, admitted to the Union, they could decide whether they wanted to be a slave state or a free state. A champion of the bill was Stephen A. Douglas, and that's important a little bit later when we get to the Lincoln administration and the Lincoln-Douglas debates. He was a leader of the Democratic Party then, and then the Republican Party. Part of the reason why I'm doing this is the Historical Society has a little broadside that was later on, and trying to get Republicans to come to a particular meeting. And one of the letters to Putnam is addressed to my hero Democrat. So these kinds of issues are relevant to the background, but they don't have the same kind of party affiliations or designations that you would think now. The newly Republican Party was founded in 1854, primarily by anti-slave activists and former Whig members. Now that's just a very funny term. The Whigs were interested in economic protectionism, and they were interested in the supremacy of Congress over the executive branch. So that was important there, and the important New Hampshire representative was Daniel Webster. He was a Whig who decided to move into the newly formed Republican Party. And then there were the Free Soil people, and that's what we have here. I will look at it. I'll show you the wording of it, but that this thing exists on eBay, a couple of years ago, just blows my mind. I think it's in California. Why? Okay. Don't need to worry about that. The Free Soil Party. They opposed the extension of slavery into the New Western Territories. They were interested in free men and free soil and thought that was more morally correct and more democratic. One of the New Hampshire leaders of the Free Soil was a man from just down the road here. He was living in Ohio then, Simon B. Chase. And another important person, another New Hampshire guy, was the first United States Senator with an abolitionist platform here in New Hampshire. He was from Rochester, named John P. Hale. All right, so now we get to 1856. Putnam is in West Point. His family here is trying to figure out what to do. It's one of the bitterest, most contentious elections in American history. Republicans nominated John Fremont. I won't hear too much about him, but he promised to end slave power and to repeal the Kansas-Nebraska Act. On the other hand, the Democrats had to figure out what they were going to do. The Democratic president at the time was, anybody remember? New Hampshire guy. Franklin Pierce, here we go. Right, Franklin Pierce. But the Democrats were at it, still with him too, because he supported the Kansas-Nebraska Act, and they didn't like that. They also feared that Stephen Douglas was a bit too dangerous, because he too had been behind the Kansas-Nebraska Act, so they looked for somebody else. If you remember your American history, it was John Buchanan. And he just squeaked by. The Electoral College just got him in there, and so he was going to split the party, really. His administration was perhaps he was a weak president, and it was There we go, Republicans at 10. The Republicans of Cornish are requested to meet at the Center Vestry on Saturday the 5th day of February next at 6 o'clock. All men in favor of free soil, free speech, free men, and a free press are invited to attend. I just thought that was kind of interesting to have here. Okay, yes.
Where was the center vestry?
I just assumed it's the same one on Center Road.
On the center.
The one where the United Church? No.
Yes, it is. There was originally two churches around on Parks Road, which is some of it. Yes. By the time 1859, it was there.
And I have the sense that people are listening to you. Okay, this, I'm sure, now, you can't read this, I know, and so there will be some things later on that you can read. But this is his conditional admission into West Point, June 11, 1853. I have no idea what the conditions were, but it was considered a conditional. Here we have some of the regulations for admission. There's no reduction of the age limit. You have to be either between 16 and 21. And Putnam will be 17 in October of 1853, so he just got in there. And you have to be at least 5 feet high, which says something about, and, you know, we need to be reminded of that, the size of people in 1853. And you also had to be, quote, free from any disorder of infectious or immoral character. That was the conditional agreement. Again, you can't read that either, but it tells you what kinds of courses he's taking. In his first year, he takes mathematics, French, and English. In his second year, math, French, drawing, which includes both human figure and topography. The third year, natural and experimental philosophy. The texts he uses were mechanics, electricity and magnetism, and optics. He also had to take a course in chemistry and in landscape drawing, again, towards the topographical kinds of things that would be important to him. In the fourth year, he took engineering and the science of war, ethics, infantry tactics, artillery, mineralogy, and geology. Now, this is what I just find fascinating. I don't know if you can read that. Up at the top, he said something about, this is a friend of his who's writing to him at West Point. And he says, I see that you began Vanity Fair, but obviously you didn't finish Vanity Fair. And this guy is trying to tell him, come on, I was much disappointed at the beginning of Vanity Fair, but as I approached the middle, I was most interested, and I'm sure you will be too. This is the kind of kind of things that kids are telling one another back and forth in those days.
Jim?
Yeah.
Just had a thing, it might be interesting to the audience to know where we were able to get these.
Right. Yep. Browner Library, Barton College, I think. Complete collection. 2 boxes of letters back and forth between Putnam and people in Cornish. And it's very easy for you to read them. Well, I wouldn't say it's easy to read. It's very easy for you to find them and get access to them. But reading them, as you will see, presents some handwriting problems. Yes.
Also, the historical.
Yes.
First 2 years that Putnam was at West Point, Robert Lee was the commandant of
Right.
that.
And you want to elaborate on the Robert E. Lee connection with
Yeah,
Putnam?
I do have one letter of his.
Lee, there's a stronger connection there too,
Right.
and that is that Haldimand was very friendly and befriended Lee, who was Robert E. Lee's son, who was also attending, he was the same age as Haldimand, also attending West Point at the time. So much so that when Haldimand went to his first post out west, he requested a leave, which was a little uncommon to be granted those types of things, especially in his first communication. But he requested a leave to come back and be part of Fitz's wedding party in Virginia. And then he went back to the people.
Did you want to add any more about?
No, that's the interesting part of it, is the connection between the leaves.
Right. Could you all hear that? No, sorry. Whom would you like to repeat? Lee, or would you repeat? Yes.
The first 2 years at Putnam was at West Point, and Robert E. Lee was the commandant of cadets. And he said that he was very friendly with Fitzley, who was Robert E. Lee's son. And was
And
the
what
best-
year did Fitzley graduate?
Same year, 57.
57, right. So this connection between Robert E. Lee and Putnam exists.
Oh, yes. Well, I mean, in a sense, Robert E. Lee was Putnam's boss, so to speak, as the commandant of cadets, and
Right.
Putnam was a student, you know. And he probably would have signed grades when he was there. So somewhere there's probably
An actual.
with Robert E. Lee's name on it.
I'm sure I would have picked that up if I had seen it in the letters at Robert, but I
Yeah,
can't.
Lee's signature has never changed.
Really. Okay, just going to go back to this friend of his who's trying to get him to read Vanity Fair, but furthermore, he wants him to read James Fenimore Cooper. Two novels I've never ever heard of. One is called Afloat and Ashore, and Miles Wallingford. They are recommended to Putnam for their hairbreadth escapes. So you can imagine that they're wonderful adventure stories that would appeal to guys at this age. This is a letter, again, which you can't read, but it's addressed to my dear old Democrat. And I just wanted to bring that in conjunction with this whole Republican Democratic thing that's going on in the background. Now, I don't know whether I'm sure you can see that it says Dear Mother, and there's a picture of Mother up here. And they're West Point, New York. I'm not interested in psychological examinations, but notice how he very carefully and ornately addresses Dear Mother. You won't see anything like that on the letters to his father. You can draw your own conclusions. We skip down to 1857. There are a lot of letters that you can see between them. When that's the year of his graduation. There's lovely phrasing here. Dear Father, I have been waiting some time in hopes to become good-natured before writing to you. But there seems no immediate prospect of that happening. So I will write feeling somewhat cross. And you can see the kind of that he might be a little cross with the script with which he's writing. And, it's hard to decipher that. But I'm sure that he's still probably just a little bit cross when he's writing that. I have been very busy preparing for examination and consequently unable to write. I'm sure you received some letters like that from your kids too. Some of my former examinations were aided by good luck, and that now I'm having my just dues, which means, well, I don't know what that means. Now this just blows my mind. In the middle of a letter that his father has written, there's this teeny little piece of folded paper. Picture of a girl, I think, and the word hobby, which is the younger sister Lucy's nickname for him. You fold back the paper. Never thinks of his poor sister Lucy. Meanwhile, back in Cornish, there's the only sets of problems. There are a set of problems there too. I'm sure you can't read and see the but the railroads have generally been in the state of blockade. That's just kind of interesting. The whole Civil War thing. Yeah.
Well, keep in mind that 1857 only been out there 2 years, and only 9 in Windsor.
I didn't get the last part.
The railroad had only been in Windsor 9 years in 1857, and only 2 in Cornish.
Right. The railroads have generally been in a state of blockade through the last week, but by running 2 or 3 engines together over the tracks, they have so far removed the snow that they make out their daily number of trips, though frequently much delayed in time. Samuel, who was Haldimand's brother, a year older than he is, in the early part of last week froze both his hands and had a furlough for the week. So, he is much better and goes upon the train tomorrow. Yours most affectionately. Then this is from Sister Isabella, who is 2 years younger than he is, describes a song recital that she gave in February 1857. I got along, it says, I got along very well. I guess what's interesting about the letter is, in the second paragraph, note the kind of sentimental songs that she's learning. One is called Now the Birds Have Gone to Rest, and the other is Now the Birds Have All Gone to Nest, and the other song is Veil of Rest. And these are the kinds of things that these girls are learning. Here we're moving up to 1857, getting close to graduation. This is his class standing 2 months before his commission. He had 38 members. He was the 6th in engineering and the science of war, 10th in ethics, 9th in infantry tactics, and 6th in cavalry tactics. And that's interesting in a way because we have a daguerreotype up here that shows his horse and someone holding it for him. And maybe one of the reasons why he's proud of his horse. Apparently, there are 29 emeritus, but there's a note to the parents, attention to the parents and guardians, that is called particularly to paragraph 72 of the regulations, which states that accumulating 100 demerits in any 6-month period is grounds of discharge from the academy. So he's quite safe, and he doesn't have to worry about that.
He ended up graduating 8th.
8th in his class. One of these able to make it in the dialectic society. This is written to his father June the 8th, shortly before graduation. Haldimand hopes that this will be the last letter he will write as a cadet, and expresses relief that his exams are over, even though the one in cavalry tactics lasted the entire week, and he was under the highest class standing. So now we skip a couple of years to 1858. Haldimand is now serving near Fort Bridger in Wyoming. And after carefully checking the postal regulations, which is some indication of the meticulousness of his men, he realizes that any book weighing less than 4 ounces only costs a cent a pound. So he sends his father $1 and says, would you please find, you can imagine the man, the father looking, I bet you've done this for your kids too, trying to find things that is around the house somewhere that they know is there, but they don't know where, and you're not sure either. But he wants Bartlett's astronomy. And he's descended to the care of the headquarters, Department of Utah. Again, it's a nice book to have, an astronomy book outside in those evening skies in the west. This is just an envelope to show where he is moving. It's part of their collection too. In 1863, he's in Fernandina in Florida, which is close to the Union Islands up in the northeast corner, just below the Georgia border. And he's now part of the 7th New Hampshire Volunteers. This is a letter from his father, the 7th of June, 1863. Note the formality here. He thanks Haldimand, quote, for the kind interest you manifest in our domestic affairs. Another way of saying, I'm glad you care about us here at home. Then he proceeds to tell him, this is in June now, we made sugar enough to fill the big barrel almost, quite enough for the family use. My hired man this then is Martin Walker, a son of your friend Moses. And if you want about 2/3 of the way down in the middle of that line, you can see he's still using the long S that you're used to seeing in print, but not really in handwriting. Your friend Moses. It would appear that he quote, took pity on you in Cornish flat a while ago. The boy is but 18 years old, but in most respects a decided improvement upon any I have had since Wilder. But I have to pay him an enormous sum of $160 for 8 months. Just in case you're not doing your math, that's $20 a month. Not an hour, not a week, not a day, but a month for work. And I'm sure you can see in this next letter, pay attention to what is capitalized. This is a letter included from a friend in Massachusetts. I trust your valuable life will be preserved from sickness, shot, shell and bullet, sword, lance, bowie knife, dagger and bayonet. Say to our Southern friends, in the name of great Jehovah and the Continental Congress, to lay down their arms. Submit and become loyal citizens of the U.S., but give to the wicked leaders, underline, of this most wicked rebellion, whatever your gentleman be, your good gentleman be, may think best. That would be Brigadier General Irwin McDowell. And then this is from Lucy. I call your particular attention to the second paragraph. This naive, or maybe this request, this shockingly, to me, a shockingly naive second paragraph. I have a favor to ask you for. I expect you will say that I'm very silly, and you will not be very far from the truth. But you see that I am collecting flowers from all parts of the world where I have friends. And if you happen to think of it sometime when you write me, and it is not a bit of trouble, I should like 2 or 3 posies from St. Augustine. This guy is not, how many, he's not far from death. And the path is going on, and sweet little girl wants our posy. This is the word who said, you never think of your sister Lucy. Okay, we've got time to show some pictures of the background here. These are 4 pictures. We have this book up here, and maybe some of you already know it. The Civil War photographs of Henry B. Moore, put out by New Hampshire Historical Society. There you have a group of 2 captains and a sergeant major from the 6th Connecticut in front of Moore's tent, or studio, at the camp Hilton's Head in South Carolina. And you can just make up at the top the D-A-G-T-Y-B-S, the daguerreotype over the tent's entrance there. This will give you some sense of what the life that Lou is about to talk about is like.
Sooner than you think.
Okay.
I'm going to interject.
Good.
This is a cook tent, and Jim referred to the primary sources. One of the primary sources that I use, and please excuse me for reading from this, but I don't want to lose any of the flavor of the language used in that book. And I'm talking about the history of the 7th New Hampshire Volunteers, of which Haldimand was commander up until just a week or so before his death, when he was brigade commander, transferred to brigade. But the gentleman who wrote the book was with him all the time that he was in service, and after the war compiled all the information in that history. His name was Henry W. Little. He was a lieutenant in the 7th during the war. He said, "For a time the rations were passably fair, and then they began to grow poor, until the men would eat but little of the food as it was placed before them, which began to grow scanty as well as poor. It will be remembered in particular that we got bean soup very often, and that it tasted very smoky, and sometimes as though the pork used in the preparation of the soup was slightly tainted or rusty. The men would file along to their places, face the table, take their plates of bean soup, turn them upside down, and file quickly back to their table."
Shades of Oliver Twist. Here's a picture of a former slave belonging to the Confederate general, a member of the 3rd New Hampshire Regiment overseas then. Notice that the women all have their bandanas and kerchiefs, and on most of them their necklaces. Plus the fact that 2 people, a man and a woman, balancing these head loads. I think, according to the book, these are all evidence, quote, of a African style perpetuated in American locales, because where there was a heavy concentration of Africans and their descendants. So, one more picture. These men are described as contraband, and I'll explain that in just a minute. These are former slaves aboard the USS Vermont in Port Royal, South Carolina, 1862. These men are not yet citizens. They're on a federal ship turned into a haven and dressed in Navy-issue clothes. It may be assumed that Moore thought, quote, this moving portrait of strong, somber, and vulnerable men aboard a warship spoke right to the heart of the conflict. Though Lincoln and many of the Northerners protested that the war was not about slavery, everybody knew that it really was. The reason they were called contraband of war is that several years later, when they were emancipated, they weren't emancipated until September of 1862. But in 1861, when this picture was taken, slavery was still legal in South Carolina, which is where they were, and not because of the war. So, to protect them, Union officials have turned to international law and declared the runaways to be, quote, contraband of war, and therefore they were safe, quote unquote, from their former slave owners. Okay, do I have your turn?
This is a picture of the 7th camp on Morris Island. The 7th and General Gilmore, landed on Morris Island on July 10th, 1863. And Gilmore had been put in command by the president because he was an engineer. He was a brilliant fellow. And there were very few Northerners that had any good to say about Charlestown. As a matter of fact, the papers of the day referred to Charlestown, South Carolina, as the hotbed of treachery, the cradle of secession, the nursery of disunion. Yeah, they didn't like Charleston, South Carolina. Lincoln didn't like it because although we had a naval blockade in effect, it wasn't very effective. And Southern people would ship their cotton to Great Britain and France, mostly Great Britain, and these runners, very fast boats, would come in with guns and ammunition and uniforms and so forth for the Union Army, or the Southern Army, excuse me. Well, they had to put a stop to that. They had to take Charleston. They had to close the port. And in order to do that, Gilmore determined that the best way would be by siege. To come in by land just wouldn't work. We didn't have control enough of routes of logistical supply to come down on the land side. So we'd come in on the seaside. In order to do that, we would have to take Fort Sumter. He knew that Fort Sumter was the open door to Charleston. He also knew that Morris Island, Fort Wagner, was the key to the door of Fort Sumter. So, that was the target. While they were resting, on the southern tip of this juggling plan, plans were being put together to assault Battery Wagner, or Fort Wagner. They wanted this position so that they could shell Fort Sumter. It was a good platform to put their artillery pieces on. There's also another fort out here called Battery Gray. Gilmore called for a meeting from the 7th New Hampshire history. And upon Colonel Putnam's return, we learned that an assault had been determined on. Contrary to his advice, twice, he said, meaning Putnam. I told the general, said he, I did not think we could take the fort, so, but Seymour overruled me. Seymour was his brigade commander. Seymour was a devil of a fellow for dash. To Major Henderson, he remarked, we are all going into Wagner like a flock of sheep. I'll show you why. This is Fort Wagner, and we can go back to it if you like, but what they're going to assault is a sandy fort. This is not concrete, but more sand. And it takes tremendous impact of artillery to break that sand down. As a matter of fact, it was never broken down effectively. What's not shown so much in such definition is this moat that goes around it. We'll talk about that a little later. The moat is 50 feet across, 5 feet deep, and is filled with sharpened sticks. So that in order to go through, it's much like the punji sticks were in Vietnam. Those of you who are familiar with those. What they will assault, and before we go on to the next slide, we're going to be talking about a bomb-proof. We have a picture of one of those. And the bomb-proof that Colonel Putnam expired on is right there in the southeast corner. But they had to take this place, and so they thought in order to take something. They determined to attack him, or determined to attack on the 17th. Well, they woke up to a terrible storm on the 17th, and they were not able to do that. So they postponed the attack until the 18th. On the 18th, at about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, the deafening roar of about 100 guns of the heaviest caliber worked with such rapidity it seemed almost unbroken. Remember, I looked down on reading the words of the seventh. Besides the storm of iron hail from Forts Wagner, Sumter, Moultrie, and Battery Gregg, all the batteries on James Island were throwing shells and shrapnel, and the nearer ones grape and canister, working their guns for all they were worth, plowing wide swaths through our ranks, which, however, were quickly closed. It's a point of honor in any Civil War soldier that their regiment would close ranks regardless of how many men dropped. The 2nd Brigade under gallant Putnam and the 7th New Hampshire Volunteers, whose soldierly bearing instilled more courage into his troops than any officer we ever saw in service during the whole period of the war. We shall never forget the scene as he sat on his horse, facing the left flank of his brigade, attired in a common soldier's blouse, without straps. He looked every inch a soldier. Now, he had told his second in command, we are going in like a flock of sheep. Haldimand was an accomplished engineer. He knew where he was going and what he had to do. And I'm sure that he knew what the results were going to be. This gives you an idea in military what these men had to do. They were coming from this end of the island, and they were going down to attack this fort through a narrow neck of land, which they could only put 6 companies in column. So they started out with 15,000 men per brigade, and they had to narrow these people down so that only 500 controlled the rest. And then, as they came through here, they had to open up their front and clear that pathway so that more men could come through. It was difficult, to say the least, in daylight. They were going to be doing it in darkness because Gilmore felt that it was easier for them to conceal themselves in the dark. Having passed to regroup, Colonel Abbott gave the order. He was in command of the 7th. that seemed to fill the air like drops of a summer shower. After that, it was hard to know or hear any command, as there was such a noise from shells and guns, together with the shrieks and cries of the wounded. And then, this is written by another fellow who was with the 54th Massachusetts. That would be Colonel Shaw's regiment. They were in the 1st Brigade, 7th Infantry was in the 2nd Brigade. 1st Brigade made the initial assault. The 2nd Brigade backed them up. However, he said, and then the word rang out forward, but how to describe the storm of shell, canister, and musket ball encountered in that 1,600 yards? Demonic shrieks seemed to shiver the air. A wrathful roar deafened us. Men fell like leaves in autumn. Yet through our whirling brains still rang the order, forward. Faster and faster they fell. Heavy charges of canister fired simultaneously from 2 flanking cannonades left heaps of the dying and dead where the right and left of my company had been. This is written by a lieutenant in the 54th Mass. And at the time that he remembered this, he was in the moat, and the water would sprout around him. Little raindrops were hitting what was canister balls. In the cannons that they were using, they were extremely large cannons, and there were 2 of them on each end of the moat that they came across. There was 2 here, and one of them trained down this way, and there was another up here trained down this way. It was called end-split fire. And with end-split fire, you hit many more targets than you would straight on, because it comes from the side. When you shoot canister rounds, you have 27 1-inch iron balls in the normal cannon. The cannons that they were firing, you had over 40 iron balls per round. The artillerists had a name for what would happen when men were close to the guns. It was called the red mist, and I'll let you use your imagination. Before starting on this charge, Colonel Putnam directed that the cap be removed from our weapons, as our dependence must be on the bayonet. They were going to get in close.
By taking the cap off, they can't fire.
They can't fire the muskets, right. And why did they want to do that? Because he wanted his men to move quickly in the assault on the fort, to get across this dangerous moat place, okay, and to get up on the walls before they could take the time to fire their weapon. And then to use the bayonet. It's going to be a close fight, if they did. In the regiment just behind us, the 100th New York Volunteers, this order was neglected. Their Colonel Dandy saying that his men never fired without orders. A statement sadly disproved within the hour. The next regiment in our rear, later on, he goes on to say, the next regiment in our rear, and he's talking about in the moat now, was the 100th New York Volunteers. They came up promptly to the ditch and in the darkness. By now, when they're in the moat, it was around 8 o'clock, 8:30. It was dark. It wasn't pitch black yet, but it was dark. Which was only lighted up by the flashes of the guns, saw the parapet covered with men, and supposing them to be Confederates, fired into them, undoubtedly killing and wounding many of our men. So not only were the men of the 7th New Hampshire being shot at and killed by fire from their front, fire from both sides from the cannons, but the New York Volunteers behind them, who were green troops, fired into their backs with their muskets. As it had now become very dark, we could only see our way when the flashes of rebel guns which swept the moat lit up the ghastly scene for a moment only, but at short intervals. Colonel Putnam, delayed by his horse from being shot from under him, now appeared upon the fort. They'd made it across the moat, they're ascending the walls of the fort. They got up to the top, some of them. And he ordered an attempt to charge and silence one of the guns that flanked the sea face, and still swept the tops and sides of the bomb-proof with grape. Because here we are right now, at the top of this wall. And this is a bomb-proof. In siege operations, firing goes on from a lot of cannon for many days. And they had bombed shot at Wagner for a number of days. Of course, the fellows that were inside won't get killed by these rounds coming in on them. So they built these bomb proofs. It's interesting to note that many of the Confederate soldiers chose not to protect themselves in the bomb proofs, but to get out of them because of the heat and because of concussions from the shells that would hit the bomb proofs. So it was a mix of 50-50. So to rather take your chances outside the bomb proof and really look for it, it had to be pretty desperate conditions inside the bomb proof. And this was a huge bomb proof. It was in vain that I tried the tumultuous crowd to get them together. All was wild uproar, with the groans and cries of the wounded, men calling for their officers, officers calling for their men, and many in wild excitement yelling with no apparent object, but to add to the confusion. Those of you who have not been in combat, it's not uncommon for animal instincts to emerge and shouting in one way to control that. We skirt the flank, climb up its face, and enter the fort through a gap in the parapet. Here we find a small body of men from our own and Colonel Putnam's brigade. A few of the 48th are near us, fighting over a traverse. We join them and take part in the fray. The foe are scarce a musket's length from us. They ply us with bullets and hand grenades. The national flag of one of the regiments is planted on the bomb proof, which forms one side of the bastion. About it, a desperate struggle goes on. Its tattered silk and tarnished gold are trodden deep in the soil. Colonel Putnam falls. This is by Adjutant H.G. Weber, who was in charge of the sector that day. He writes his reminiscences. He was on our Colonel Putnam went up to bomb-proof and endeavored to get up a charge, but in vain, after which, drawing his men into the crowded corner of the fort, he endeavored to hold out until reinforcements, for which he had sent, should arrive. The enemy made one charge upon us, but were driven back by our fire. It's interesting that they were able to drive the Tartars back inside their own fort. Shortly afterwards, a ball through the head stretched Colonel Putnam among the slain, just as he announced to Captain Rollins his determination to hold out till the last. Again, from 7th. Conspicuous among the fellow corpses was that of a tall, superbly formed man, an officer whose calm features, only the more clearly cut by the chisel of death, gazed toward a cloudless sky, a breathless appalling. This was Colonel Putnam of the 7th New Hampshire. Although horrible to relate, the entire back part of his head had been blown off. The wonderful beauty of his face remained intact and unshadowed, evoking from his foes a sigh of pity. This from the lieutenant of 54th Mass. His exact position on the parapet of Fort Wagner at the time of his death, as near as could ever be ascertained by any of the 7th Regiment, was near the southeast angle where above the first line of the parapet was what seemed to be another line of works just a few feet recessed from the first, and rising much higher, but which was afterwards found to be the immense roof or covering of a large bomb-proof, with which the fort was provided, on top of which he was killed by a bullet through the head. In the turmoil and the darkness, and the almost utter impossibility of crossing the line of fire between the fort and our entrenchments over the way with such a burden, it would have been impossible to have the body removed. The right of burial was therefore left to rebel hands. Note that on the morning of the 18th, the 7th mustered in 480 men. 216 were killed in the assault on Fort Wagner. That was a loss ratio of 45%. The 54th Massachusetts, although they got certainly more glory than the 7th New Hampshire did, lost 40% of their members. The numbers of the other regiments that made the assault are similar, although less. These were the two highest. It is a historical fact that in this assault, the 7th New Hampshire lost more officers than any other regiment in any one engagement during the war. 7th New Hampshire had 77 men killed at Fort Wagner, the rest were wounded and captured. The highest death toll for a New Hampshire regiment in a single battle for the entire war. So not only did they lose more officers than any other New Hampshire regiment before, but they also had the highest men. I think we should all of us who are Cornish residents, we should all be proud of Colonel Putnam and what he did here at Wagner. I wanted to read this for you so that you have an appreciation of the sacrifices, not only of Putnam, but of all the men who fought in the Civil War to keep this union home. The sacrifices that they made were truly amazing. One more piece that I'd like to read. This one instead. I'm looking for this one. Excuse me. We'll find it. I'll read it up. One last paragraph from the 7th. The recollection of his exemplary life and heroic death will ever be sacredly cherished by kindred and friends, and the thousands of soldiers who have served in his command, and especially by the officers and men of the old 7th, whom it was his fortune to personally command. In his death, the Union Army lost one of its best and greatest commanders. Because I'm going to read an excerpt out of the Stone after we adjourn from a sermon that was given in this very building, August 30th of 1863. We talk about primary documents. This is, and we found it down at the Historical Society in Concord. And it's quite a sermon. Pardon? Malcolm Douglas. Windsor. Yeah. And I understand that the parish of Windsor, whoever was minister there, would not only come here, correct me if I'm wrong, but they came here, but went out to Brunswick. And
Yes. Did the bodies, were the bodies of We know from the 54th that they were thrown in a common grave. Is that true of the 7th?
I was just going to go there. And that's an excellent question and a fine lead, thank you. We're talking about the bodies. Shaw, as you know, was buried with his colored boys at Fort Wagner. That may not be so, because Haldimand is supposedly buried at Fort Wagner. May not be so. There was some controversy there. On the day following the battle, the killing, as they refer to it in the book, on the day following the killing, Colonel Haldimand, who was a Confederate soldier, and a friend and classmate of Haldimand's, went to the fort to see the damage and view the carnage that had taken place, and was shown a body and 2 shoulder straps, similar to the one we have up here, of a colonel who fell on a bomb proof. He went over to him and he said that he could not recognize Haldimand and say with any positive feeling that this was Haldimand because he had no beard when he was at the point. And of course his fellow was dirty and had lain there overnight. Remember, folks, this is July. These folks had very poor diets. Corpses would turn black in a matter of hours. So it was very difficult to recognize this man who was pointed out as being the colonel that had assaulted the fort. Well, remember I told you that Haldimand sat on his horse with a common soldier's blouse? He probably did not have, although he may have, it's hard to say with any proof positive, but he most likely did not have his shoulder guards, with his colonel's shoulder guards. So I think that the fellow that they saw and that the Southern officer identified as perhaps being Haldimand was perhaps, in fact, Shaw of the 54th. Because Shaw went into battle with his full coat and straps and all of the sash and sword. Well, why couldn't they identify Shaw with his coat? Because the corpses and anything the man had on him was stripped by the Confederate soldiers. You know, if it was at any good at all, and most of the Union uniforms were, particularly that was 63.
Is there a monument there?
Oh, yeah, the burial parties would go out and made strippings guys. They would, when they went in the hall, they went in the hall naked. And so this fellow was probably pretty well stripped. And his jacket probably was.
Louis, is there a monument there? Is there a monument there on that site?
Of the battle of the 40s, yes. Yeah. Now, interestingly enough, one of the things that we didn't talk about, okay, I'll be back in just a minute. One of the things that I didn't talk about was that Putnam's performance in this action was so exemplary. You don't see any Fort Shaws down there, do you? Not that I've got something against Shaw. He's a wonderful fellow. He lives in Boston, and the Red Sox are doing good. And so are the Celtics. So that's great. But I'm suggesting that Haldimand sacrifice may have even been more than what Shaw's was, because it was recognized by the command staff who conducted this thing. They named Battery Greg, remember what was out on the end of the point, after Putnam a few days after the battle. So it was called Battery Putnam. Yeah. Question?
How old was he when he got killed? He was around 25,
26.
26.
But it's just a wonderful Cornish connection that we have the Shaw Memorial by Justice St. Gardens and Haldimand Putnam. both of us, connected in some way with all of that.
So can we assume that he had had other engagements prior to this?
Good question. I don't know. There were some skirmishes that took place. I can tell you that on the 10th of July, Gilmore landed on the southern end of Morris Island. And they attempted an assault on Wagner on the 10th, when they placed 200 men and 10 cannon on the southern end of Morris Island. Okay. Coming marching towards Wagner. A number of the soldiers who were in that assault claimed that if they had continued and not paused after they moved that line of skirmishers, okay, Confederate skirmishers, that they would have taken Wagner that day because the Confederates were so disorganized and flabbergasted, Union soldiers were on our island. So there would not have been the organized defense of that fort that there was on the 18th. They knew because of the signaling that had gone on between the fleet, and that's one of the things that we didn't mention. The Union forces were firing on Wagner from 4 o'clock until the time of the assault, from old, new Ironsides, okay, and they had 7 miles that they were firing.
That's all, there's the evidence up there.
Yeah. So they pulled quite a broad Where are we going? Are there any other questions on the military side of this?
Wow, he did a good job.
Jim and I, by the way, did not coordinate our outfits tonight. That was quite like
There will be refreshments